billion. Combined to send stocks sharply lower today. The Dow, down 400 for a time, ended just 209 points lower. Still bad. The Nasdaq down 79. Airline stocks all higher, though, because TSA workers and air traffic controllers back on the job today. The cost of a first-class stamp now a nickel higher. It's 55 cents. And one estimate says this Sunday's Super Bowl could cost employers up to $4.5 billion in lost worker productivity because so many are expected to call out sick on Monday after the game. And the rest will be talking about the game all day long. I'm Tom Busby, CNBC.
Indeed knows it's hard to find qualified candidates when you're hiring.
It's like finding a unicorn.
But when you post your job on Indeed, it's easy to find people with the skills you need.
Nurse practitioner, 4+ years experience, acute care certification.
Indeed has a huge pool of amazing candidates and screener tools that help you find your most qualified applicants.
Whoa, an entire short list of unicorns.
Now, get a $50 credit to give your first job posting premium placement at Indeed.com/credit. Terms, conditions, quality standards, and usage limits apply. Additional terms online.
It's time for some straight talk. Look, you wouldn't spend more to get the exact same thing, would you? No. So when I tell you that Straight Talk Wireless runs on the same cell towers as the big guys but charges up to 30% less, you see where I'm going with this, right? Get America's best 4G LTE networks for less. The new Ultimate Unlimited plan is just $55 a month. Straight Talk Wireless. Everything for less.
Video typically streams at DVD quality. A month equals 30 days. At 60 gigabytes, we may review accounts for violations of terms and conditions found at straighttalk.com.
NBC News Radio, I'm Brian Shook. The President and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi have agreed to hold the State of the Union next Tuesday. Pelosi sent a letter to President Trump today requesting that he deliver the annual speech in front of Congress on February 5th. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election is almost finished. Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker said that he believes the probe is close to being completed and looks forward to getting Mueller's report as soon as possible. The Justice Department is charging a Chinese telecom giant with conspiracy to steal trade secrets. Today, Acting Attorney General Whitaker said Huawei conspired to steal trade secrets from T-Mobile. FBI Director Christopher Wray discussed the charges.
Both sets of charges expose Huawei's brazen and persistent actions to exploit American companies and financial institutions and to threaten the free and fair global marketplace.
Brian Shook, NBC News Radio.
How would you feel if you had to make a choice between buying food or spending your fixed income on life-saving medicine? No one should make that trade-off, but many low-income seniors are forced into difficult decisions like this every day. Smiles for Seniors Foundation provides energy assistance and safety net services to struggling low-income seniors in the Inland Empire. They provide one-time assistance to seniors to meet specific financial needs. They've helped with food, housing, utility payments, minor home and auto repairs, along with life-saving prescriptions or medical equipment. A nonprofit foundation funded entirely by donations from local organizations. Smiles for Seniors receives no funding from the state or federal government. They are funded by local businesses and individuals like you with big hearts and willing wallets. You can find more information or to donate to Smile for Seniors at 909-790-6671. That's 909-790-6671. Or visit smilesforseniorsfoundation.org. That's smilesforseniorsfoundation.org.
Auto Integrity salutes our veterans and troops who are serving our country. We owe them a debt of gratitude for their courage and their sacrifices they're making to secure the safety of our country for future generations. And we await their safe return home. This message from Auto Integrity, located at 4749 Holt Boulevard in Montclair. Their quality service has earned them a fine reputation. For more info, you can call 909-653-6154. That's 909-653-6154 for Auto Integrity, proud sponsor of Salute to the Troops. Randy's Equipment Repair remind everyone that one of the keys to locating missing children is getting current info into the hands of the proper authorities. So keep recent photos and always remember what they're wearing. Have your child fingerprinted at an early age because kids change and the fingerprints, they don't. This reminder from Randy's Equipment Repair, serving our community with pride for over 30 years. For the specialists in construction equipment repair services, you can call Randy today, 909-855-7812. That's
KCAA.
And
now, it's For the People with Judge Herb Dodell.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If you listened to our show last week, you heard that our guest today was going to be Roger Stone.
It was.
Something came up.
What
just
happened,
just a little thing came up in the meantime. But we'll take advantage of it. And what we're going to do today, kind of in an interesting way, because every week we try to do something a little bit different. What we're going to do is we've interviewed Roger Stone twice. The first time we interviewed him was on June the 4th. And it was a great interview. In fact, Roger said at the end, it was a great interview. That was his comment. And we developed a nice rapport with him. And so he came back a second time, and we had another interview on September the 24th, in which he talked about the Russians meddling in our elections. He kind of admitted that. One thing I found out about Roger is that he is very upfront, very professional, and somewhat convincing. In some of the things that he says, there's a kernel of truth to it. And what I'm going to talk about today is trial strategies. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the criminal process, starting with what happened to Roger last Friday.
Yeah, where I guess 29 FBI agents raided his home in the middle of the night. That's pretty heavy.
That's not uncommon.
29?
Well, I don't know if it's 29, but it's not uncommon for the FBI to come with large numbers for a lot of very legitimate reasons.
Like
Number
what?
one, to protect the agents that are going there to execute two warrants. There was one, an arrest warrant that's just going to pick them up, but the other is a search warrant. And sometimes when defendants are cornered, they will do things. And these arrests usually take place by surprise so that the defendant is not aware and can't be prepared for it.
Right.
So the question was whether or not the CNN tipped everybody off, or whatever they say, whether the FBI tipped off CNN. There was good reporting. They expected this guy to get arrested, and so they had somebody camped out there.
Yeah, they did.
And they knew exactly what was going on. No, it sounds very, very invasive. And Roger, of course, in his many appearances since then, I was talking about how abusive it was and how outrageous it was. It was not abusive. It was not outrageous. They treated him with dignity. They were professional.
He even said that.
And they do what they do. They're sworn law enforcement officers doing their job.
Yeah, and they can't just let him, give him a heads up.
Well, what's one of Roger's rules is, deny everything, admit nothing. It says so in his book.
Yeah.
In fact, when we get to the interview that we're going to play for you in a minute or two, you can see that's what he says. He talks about all his rules. And so we're going to talk about the indictment itself, the various methods by which the government can charge people with crimes, what the elements are, what potential defenses he might have. But let me start off by saying I read the indictment once. I have not read the transcript upon which the indictment is based, so I can't tell whether the quotes in the indictment are out of context or otherwise. They may very well be. They picked the parts that looked good for them, and they left out the parts that didn't. And so I can't really render an opinion if I was sitting on this as the judge without having a lot more information than has been made available to the public. Some of these witnesses are now testifying on the radio. Jerome Corsi is now becoming a witness, and I'll talk about witnesses in general. What do you do? What the risks are? The charges, whether we're undercharged or overcharged, because a lot of things that happened, no charges.
Yeah, well, look at Michael.
That says a lot. That says a lot.
Michael Cohen said he didn't want to testify before Congress because he was afraid for his family. I mean, this is pretty heavy stuff.
Well, it's a heavy penalty at the end of the day if it turns out that he's lying. But keep in mind, before we play the last interview, keep in mind, what's the purpose here? What's the purpose of the investigation? Some people will say that the purpose is to get the president and get him out. There's a group of people in the world who don't want this guy to be the president, and they'll do whatever it takes to get them out. Some people say they tried to do that with the Kavanaugh nomination. This is a dirty business.
Yeah.
It's beyond dirty. And, and Trump has been saying all along that what they were doing was trying to use this dossier, which they claimed had no real merit, to get search warrants and things of that nature, or tap warrants. And so this is a real adversarial battle, which really goes to the heart of our democracy. And we're going to see justice play itself out here, whether or not he's convicted or not. Remember those magic words, beyond a reasonable doubt, to a moral certainty, actually. And so the reality is, can they prove all these things? And we're going to talk about each of these counts or charges when we finish listening to the tape of Roger. And if there's something that he says in the middle that I think warrants a comment, I'll let you know, Gary, and then you can stop it there and we'll talk about it.
Whatever you say, Judge.
So let's go do it.
Ready to roll the tape here.
Roll it.
This is an interview Judge did from September 24th with Roger Stone.
Well, good afternoon, and good afternoon to you, Roger.
Delighted to be with you again.
You have no idea how delighted I am that you're here, because I had no plan B. You were plan A with no plan B. So I'm glad you're there. I want you to know I read your book cover to cover, and when I put it down, I said to myself, it's absolutely amazing what this man has written, because all of the conduct that he describes, your rules, are what President Trump did when he was running for president and what he's doing now. I said he's following Roger Stone's playbook. So it's quite remarkable. You did a better job than I thought you did the first time when I talked about how successful you were. Great job.
Well, that's very kind. You know, I've been in the American arena for 40 years, and in a certain sense, I guess I've seen it all. At the same time, you know, I'm not an insider. I'm not an establishment thinker. I'm not a machine politician. I try to think outside the box. It's important to recognize the extent to which the internet has changed everything, has really democratized our politics with a small d. And now they seek to roll it back through a campaign of censorship where voices on the right, particularly, are being shadow banned and censored. They're really trying to go back to the days when a handful of media outlets really controlled our political discourse, and where, well, like radio shows like this didn't have the kind of impact that they have today.
Well,
radio and the internet have really changed the face of our politics.
Well, you made a point to that in your book, and I made note of it because I think you're absolutely right. But I don't know if I go along with an argument of censorship. I think we have a very strong First Amendment. The fact that there are many more on the left that are buying time and spending money in advertising and promotion is just a function of how much money people are willing to invest in whatever the process may be. But I thought it was very interesting. I played our last interview, and I thought it was pretty good, actually. And you made a comment that there really is something like the deep state. You referred to Eisenhower as referring to it as the military-industrial complex. And I thought to myself, I've been thinking about that. Is there really a deal between both sides where they're really the same? Because that's what you said. McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, they're all of the same mold, and they're all going to do the same thing. The names change, but the policies really never do. There may be some merit in that. Because I was thinking, before the campaign really got into full play, there was a dialogue about cleaning out the swamp. But I've looked around. It doesn't look like the swamp got cleaned out. It looks like they just replaced it with a different swamp. And that kind of falls under what you're saying.
I think I would argue that they didn't even replace it. I mean, look, I'm a strong supporter of the president, but I still think that even he has systematically surrounded himself with people who are tied to the past, who are tied to the policies that brought the country to its knees, and that he really, even in his own cabinet, has not succeeded in bringing in outsiders and tossing out the insiders. It's a mistake to think of our politics today in terms of Republicans and Democrats. That's outdated thinking. You've got to think in terms of outsiders and insiders. And when you get right down to it, the Bushes and the Clintons, while they talk a good game, they're really not different in any way. Their policies have given us endless foreign war, erosion of our civil liberties, a stagnant economy, a broken immigration system, trade deals that cost us jobs. And there's really no difference. At election time, they try to sound different, but it's a kabuki act for the voters. It's really a fraud upon the voters. Every once in the blue moon, an outsider like a Ronald Reagan or a Donald Trump comes along. And then when they do, the establishment, once they determine that they cannot beat them, they try to co-opt them. And to a great extent, that is unfortunately happening even today in this administration.
Is that the reason why they can't seem to get anything done in the Congress?
Well, I would argue he's gotten a lot done. 3.2 million new jobs, 4.6% economic growth, headed towards 6% in the next quarter, I think, just under it. Wages having the fastest growth in American history. Black unemployment, Hispanic unemployment at the lowest point since they began keeping those statistics. Record stock market.
Well, let me ask you a psychological question. I know you're not a psychologist and you're not a lawyer, but it seems to me that there's a real dichotomy between the people who like him a lot and people who hate him. And I use that word advisedly. The question really is, are people going to continue to vote their pocketbook, which is what they've done historically, or are the people who dislike this man so much are going to take over because even if it's contrary to their own pocketbooks? What do you think?
That's the $64 million question, as they say. We're going to find out soon. One thing we know is that the polls in the past have been incorrect in terms of their predictions regarding this man. They badly underestimated his support in the presidential election. They've been maybe making the same mistake again. There is definitely a factor out there of people who support the president but don't want to talk about it because they just don't want to put up with the crap from their, from their neighbors or their critics who disagree. I see this as I move around. People recognize me and my long association with Donald Trump, and people who you would not expect come up and tell me quietly that they're in his corner and they support what he's doing. So his support may be understated. You're right. Traditionally, the economy has been the key underpinning for our politics. We're going to see how much of a factor it is in this next election. I would say this. If I were advising the president today, and I'm not, I'd be telling him to talk about it more. I don't think he talks about the economy more as much as he should. But I definitely think people are feeling the results of a rising tide lifting all boats.
Well, you also said in our last interview that 89% of the evangelicals supporting him. And despite all of the things that have come out and the Access Hollywood and Stormy Daniels and all of that, he still has almost 90% of the people on the Republican side, the evangelicals, who are supporting him despite that. What do you think about that?
Well, it's a key element of his base. Obviously, those people think his agenda is more important than his past. Also, as you know, Christians believe in forgiveness. It doesn't matter what you thought a year from now. What matters is what you feel today. It doesn't matter if you weren't right with Jesus, if you're right with him today. So I think that remains a key element of the president's support, but it's not enough by itself. He's going to have to reach, as he did in the election, beyond his base. If you examine it from a geographic point of view, Mitt Romney and John McCain couldn't carry Michigan. Donald Trump did. They couldn't carry Wisconsin. Donald Trump did. They couldn't carry Pennsylvania. Donald Trump did. They couldn't carry Ohio. Donald Trump did. Now, if you examine why, among blue-collar, ethnic, Catholic Democrats, working-class Democrats, Trump won votes that those other gentlemen, McCain and Romney, could not win. That's the real key vote. That's why I scratch my head when I see the president fighting with Richard Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO, particularly when Trump and Trumka are substantially in agreement on trade policy and obviously the president's job creation program, which is good news for organized labor. I think that's an important constituency you got to keep your eyes on.
So you don't think that the hoopla about his personal habits and the way he treats things is going to make an ultimate difference? People are going to still
I don't think anybody cares. I really don't. I think they care more about whether they have a job, whether there's prospects for their children to have employment and a bright future. I think those matters are more important. Also, for reasons that I can't put my finger on, he's unlike any other political figure that I've worked for or that I have examined up close. He's a phenomena unto himself, and the rules, as you and I know them, that have been pretty standard for political figures in our country don't seem to apply to him. Well, so voters, at least so far, are overlooking the personal and looking at it more from a policy point of view.
That may very well be true. Now, there's a lot of things going on in the news today, and since we have a limited amount of time, I thought I'd kind of get your opinion. And it's not too difficult to get your opinion, actually. You're very good about that.
We love your opinion.
No, but you speak. You speak it like it is. What do you think is going to happen with Kavanaugh? What do you think is going to happen with Kavanaugh?
Well,
the second lady just came out.
This is a new phenomenon. Yeah, this is a new phenomenon, though. I've never seen this before, where a woman can come out, no witnesses, no corroboration, no evidence, and just make a charge and have it be taken seriously, first of all, by the mainstream media, and then heralded by the Democrats. And the Republicans are afraid to ask the obvious question. Okay, lady, who else saw this? Who else did you tell when it happened? When did it happen? Where did it happen? I think that both these witnesses are lying. They can't provide any basic corroboration. They would have no shot whatsoever to survive in a court of law. They put up no evidence. It's just the charge. Now, the standard rule in journalism in this country, in the Western world, has always believed you needed at least two sources to confirm something before you could write it as a fact.
Says that in the Bible.
And that seems to be out the window now.
Well,
out the window now.
But taking off the hat of just an interviewer for today and putting on the judge's cap,
you are a judge.
Wig.
You are a judge. You don't have a wig, though, do you?
I don't have a wig. I haven't even got a gavel.
Okay.
There's a gavel in a drawer someplace. I know that there's a gavel someplace.
All right, there you go.
But the fact of the matter is, let's assume that there are three women who came out and all complained about basically the same thing, a sexual assault. There's statutes in the rules of evidence that allow prior events to come in as it's almost like an attack on character, but it basically allows a jury or a finder of fact to say if he did it before, the chances are that he did it again. And what if you have that situation?
We don't have any evidence that he did it before.
Okay, well, it's going to be a factual issue.
I'd be happy to do the full Ireland spectrum on these women. I would destroy them on cross. And I'm not an attorney. I would destroy them. The Republicans need to have the courage to do that.
What if they don't?
What proof do you have? Anybody can say anything. Why did it take you 6 days to remember this? How come you had to have these memories came back from regressive psychotherapy? No, it just doesn't pass the smell test. It's not credible. I think we don't know how it plays out because I want to see how she performs in a hearing.
How do you think it'll affect the election? How do you think it's going to affect the women?
It's just too early to say. There's a front page New York Times story today that says that if Kavanaugh is confirmed, that women will not, will turn out and vote in record numbers against Republicans. Unproven. That's what's called a theory.
Do you believe
that? We don't know that yet.
Do you believe that?
Not necessarily. Just think back historically. When Anita Hill criticized Clarence Thomas, a Supreme Court nominee, and she was subjected to a withering cross-examination from Arlen Specter, we were told two things. Thomas would not be confirmed, and Specter would then be defeated in the next election. Guess what? Thomas was confirmed, and Specter won his next re-election, carrying a majority of women. So, I think the Republicans are being cowardly by refusing to directly cross-examine these witnesses and put them to the test. Then we'll see if the American people believe them or whether they see the absence of corroborating evidence or witnesses as troubling. I would think that that's an issue.
What about the fact that she reported this event to a psychotherapist about, I think it was about 8-10 years ago? And that was Kavanaugh was not even a name that anybody ever heard of at that time, unless you were in the legal system.
Well, Yeah, well, I'd like to put the psychotherapist under oath and put him on the stand to find out if that's even true, because we don't know that's true. Someone comes out of the woodwork with no evidence. I don't know. It's it's like judges like say, how will this trial come out when we haven't had the trial yet? It's hard to say. It's an open question.
You also mentioned in your book, and you might have even mentioned it on the last time we had an interview, that you don't believe there's anything to this Russia investigation. And I kind of agreed with you in the sense that I commented, at the moment, we have seen nothing. And we decide cases as judges on evidence, admissible evidence, as a matter of fact, and burdens of proof. So at the moment, there's nothing. You may be right. What if there is evidence that comes out that there was such a business activity going along between the Russians and the Trump people? Wouldn't you think that that would change the whole paradigm and the whole dynamic?
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, I would admit that there's evidence of Russian meddling in the election. Wasn't necessarily designed to help Donald Trump. In fact, it appears to me to have been ham-handed, poorly organized, badly written, and underfunded. But clearly the Russians were trying to sow dissent. I think their goal was just to get Americans fighting with each other. At various times, their messaging is pro-Hillary, anti-Hillary, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, pro-Bernie Sanders, anti-Bernie Sanders. And the little net-based advertising I saw was clearly written by somebody who had English as a second language, so I don't think it was terribly effective. But Russian collusion, that would be coordination, conspiracy, colluding with the Trump campaign, there's no evidence of that. Now, one thing you learn in politics that maybe you don't learn in law is you don't answer hypothetical questions. What if? Well, we don't. That hasn't happened. 2 years and $17 million investigation, and there's still no evidence of Russian collusion. I think that this is it's a left-wing conspiracy theory. It's a canard. It's a fairy tale.
Are you saying that there's really no admissible evidence to support any such argument? Or are you just saying you don't know?
I've seen none. And, no, we've had $17 million in a 2-year investigation. We still haven't seen any. We've seen evidence of Russian meddling. That's not Russian collusion. It's a very different ball of wax.
Would you be surprised if evidence was discovered that showed such a relationship existed?
Judge, there is evidence. Bill and Hillary took $145 million from the Russian energy company while control of 20% of Russians, of America's enriched uranium was on her desk for approval. I could take that to a grand jury in an hour and get an indictment. There's plenty of evidence, but the special counsel doesn't seem to be interested in crimes by others, only crimes potentially by Donald Trump and his supporters.
So I guess you'd say this is somewhat politically oriented?
When the man who appointed Mueller is exposed as proposing to wear a wire to entrap the President of the United States in order to remove him under the 25th Amendment, yeah, I would say that investigation is suspect. Why is there not a single Republican other than Mueller, who's just a nominal Republican by registration only, but the man who, by the way, muled the uranium samples to Stockholm for the Russians to examine, to close the Uranium One deal that I speak of? I've written a 5,000-word piece on this. You can see it at the Daily Caller. Why are there no Republicans among these prosecutors? Why are they all liberal Democrats, and many of them veterans of Hillary's campaign or Clinton donors? Yeah, I think this is a partisan witch hunt. Look, I've been subjected to it. 12 of my current or former associates have been interrogated by the FBI. 8 of my associates have gone to the grand jury, and I can tell you with total confidence they will find no evidence of Russian collusion or WikiLeaks collaboration or any other illegal act pertaining to the 2016 election. Why am I being persecuted? Because I've been a friend of Donald Trump's for 40 years. That's why.
Well, that's is an interesting perspective. So Rosenstein was supposedly going to be fired today. I heard on the radio today that didn't happen. Do you think he's going to get canned?
It appears to me to be also an open question, because if he has not been fired, he has not resigned. That means that the people around the president have 4 days to talk him out of firing Rosenstein. You have NBC and Huffington Post and a few others saying, "Oh, he was only joking." Actually, he was specifically asked if he was joking, and he said, "No, this is all memorialized in a memo by Andrew McCabe, who was once the number 2 guy at the FBI." It's very clear that he wasn't joking. Also, the specificity of it, saying, "Well, I can easily get my cell phone into a meeting with the president without the Secret Service inspecting it because they've never looked at it before." That's pretty specific for a joke that's not very funny. So I think he's busted. And if I know the president at all, I don't think he's very happy. There is an argument that could be made that perhaps the president should not rock the boat until after the election, that it may be seen as, trying to end the investigation of Mr. Mueller. I would argue that the president should do the one thing he has not yet done: go to the American people with an Oval Office address directly from the Oval Office and lay out why he's doing what he's doing. First, I'd talk about the economy. Then I'd lay out whatever steps he's going to take regarding not only Mr. Rosenstein, but the crying need to declassify all of the information pertaining to these FISA warrants. A FISA warrant can only be issued against an American citizen if they're actively engaged in espionage on behalf of a foreign power against the United States. Nobody on whom a FISA warrant was issued meets that criteria. And I think the application documents, which they lied to a judge about, that judge recused himself. He's still never given us a reason why.
I'll ask you one last question, Roger. You think he should fire Sessions?
Very definitely, but probably not until after the election. At this point, it doesn't matter. Sessions he's comatose. He's having no impact whatsoever.
Okay. Well, you certainly are entertaining, Roger, and I learn a lot every time I talk to you. So I appreciate you coming on the show. I wish you well, and I recommend to our listeners that they get your book because they'll learn how to dress. I'm giving up my tie and pocket silk matching now that I've read your book. I'm not going to wear any more baggy pants, and I've got the whole thing blazers only after 6 o'clock,
You learn how to make a martini, too.
Oh, Dick Nixon. We used to call him Dick Nixon. We don't call him Dick anymore. It's Richard M. Nixon now.
That's right.
He used to love those martinis, those gin martinis.
Yes, indeed. All right,
okay, Raj, thanks very much. Talk to you again. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Thank you.
Okay, well, that was the interview that we took about, 4 months ago.
Yeah.
And he was right about Sessions. He got fired right after the election.
He did.
Roger is an interesting character. You get a real perception from him. He always sounds so righteous and so believable. And that gets to the question about trial strategies, which we'll talk about after the break.
Did they file a FISA warrant against him when they raided his house? Do you know that?
Oh, they had a search warrant.
But what's the difference between that and a FISA?
FISA is to wiretap and do surveillances.
Oh, that's behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Generally so.
That's what I'm asking. Okay,
so we'll talk about the defenses and how's Roger going to do, and if he goes to trial. My predictions without knowing a whole lot more than I've seen so far.
All right, and get the Judge's book, From the Trench to the Bench, available on Amazon.com. We'll be back with Judge right after this.
NBC Talk Radio, 1050 AM, KCAA.
In his book, From the Trench to the Bench, Judge Herb Dodell demystifies the legal system, including both civil and criminal, the lawyers, the judges, and the process. As a judge, former deputy district attorney, and criminal defense attorney, he knows the legal system. He has the inside information that you need to pick a lawyer, and he's here to give it to you. No matter what you're facing that makes you think you may need a lawyer, Judge Herb will shed valuable light on your situation and reveal your best options and many secrets of how the judicial system actually works. To find out more about how the legal system really works, you can get your copy of Judge Herb Dodell's eye-opening book, From the Trench to the Bench, at Amazon.com.
Okay, well, now we're going to talk about some criminal law. Let me give you a little background so you can understand the source of it. I was a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles County. I was a prosecutor. And then when I went into private practice, I became a criminal defense lawyer. So I've seen it pretty much on both sides for a long, long time. And I got to say, over all the years, even prosecuting cases or defending them, I never saw anybody charged with perjury. Never did. People lie at depositions, documents are wrong, nothing ever happens. So you have to ask yourself, why all of a sudden are they doing what they're doing with Roger Stone? Now, there are generally two ways that criminal cases are instituted. The first is by called a criminal complaint. In state court cases, if there's a criminal complaint, the defendant is entitled to what's called a preliminary hearing. I remember when I was just in the beginning in the DA's office, I would do 7, 8, 9 prelims in a day.
Right.
And that's how quick I had the files. I looked it over. It took me 30 seconds to read it. You put the cop on. He says whatever he says. She says whatever she says. Whatever it is. Boom, hold the answer. You rarely lose them.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say rarely. I would say less than 5% are won at the preliminary hearing.
Yeah, I remember going to one with my dad, a preliminary hearing. It's a real quick thing. It's
like real quick.
2-3 hours at the most.
Look, I was in the DA's office maybe 2 weeks when I was doing prelims. That's how easy they were. But the reality is, a prelim allows the defense an opportunity to cross-examine witnesses.
Sort of see the case, too, a little
you
bit.
get a little view, but plus what you read in the complaint, because I'm going to talk about what this indictment looked like in a minute.
Yeah.
But you get a chance to see what the complaint looks like. It used to be that we as defense lawyers could use these preliminary hearings to conduct the equivalent of discovery, because there's no discovery in criminal cases with some limited exceptions. And so you would have an opportunity to ask whatever you wanted. And the old days, they had to put on eyeball witnesses. In California, they passed what they call the Victims' Bill of Rights a number of years ago. Now all the hearsay comes in, the cop is the only one who shows up, and I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it happens regularly. So it becomes like a walk in the park. And the judges will not let you use the prelim to do discovery.
So they don't even show up, the victims?
A lot of the times, that's right. A lot of times, that's right. Generally, the victims show with the witnesses and things like that.
Okay.
But the bottom line is, we used to be able to ask all kinds of leading questions because it's enough. But leading questions are permitted if you are cross-examining. Not permitted if you are asking your own witnesses or your own client. It gives you an advantage. A leading question, which I've explained on one of the prior shows, is where the answer is already built into the question. Isn't it true that, and
law and order question.
Well, it's the old beating your wife question. When did you stop beating your wife?
Oh, God.
And the argument is, well, that assumes that
you beat your wife.
You beat her at some time in the past.
Yeah.
And so leading questions are permitted in cross-examination. So you develop a record. And like you do in depositions in a civil case, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get these witnesses or parties to commit to a position, to take testimony on a particular point that you hope later on you'll be able to show is inconsistent. And I'm going to talk about inconsistencies and credibility witnesses when we get to the discussion of the indictment against Roger Stone. And so way number one is a complaint. Way number two is called an indictment. What is an indictment? People hear that term all over. I'll bet you since Roger was indicted on Wednesday, most people don't know what the hell that means. That means he's being charged. Yes, that's right. He's being charged. Is there a preliminary hearing? No. What happens? How do you get indicted?
Tell us.
Well, you get indicted by something known as the grand jury. The actual charges are filed by the prosecutor, but it's based on a finding by the grand jury. A grand jury is a group of people who serve for a period of time as what they call grand jurors. Obviously, that's what's called the grand jury. And this is a proceeding where only the prosecution test brings in evidence. They pick what they want. They leave out the stuff that It's not going to help them get the charges filed.
Yeah, the cherry pick it.
But and witnesses do not have the right to have a lawyer. Witnesses come in, they're subpoenaed, and they're sitting there.
Sounds unfair.
Well, I think I told the story. My first one in the grand jury was when I was representing a movie called Deep Throat. I was the lawyer for the distributor.
All right.
And he got it subpoenaed for the grand jury. And it was those days, distribution of anything pornographic was a criminal offense. Things have changed based on First Amendment rights and history. But I stood outside. He went in. I told him, give him your name and address, not another thing. And you take the Fifth Amendment. Here's what you read. I gave him a little card. And it says that he's asserting his Fifth Amendment rights. He did that. We were out of there in like 20 minutes because they weren't getting anything out of him.
Right.
And so the second way of being charged is with a grand jury. It's called a true bill. I always like that term. True bill means that the grand jury has determined that there's sufficient basis, same criteria as a preliminary hearing, that a crime has been committed or may have been committed, and the person being charged or to be charged is likely the person that did it. Pretty skimpy. It doesn't even reach the level of preponderance. Is there anything that really shows that? And so you take all kinds of assumptions and whatever, and that's why people get charged.
Seems unfair.
Very simple. Well, I'm not so sure it's unfair, but the bottom line really is that's the second way of doing it. So Roger Stone was indicted.
By a grand jury.
By a grand jury who concluded the things that were charged in the indictment, which were, in order, 1 count of obstruction of justice, 5 counts, I'm calling them counts, the charges, of perjury, lying to the FBI, and the last one was intimidating a witness. And I'm going to tell you about that last one because there's a very interesting possibility with regard to that 7th charge. What was interesting about the indictment, it's a 26-page indictment.
You read the whole thing?
I did. Is that it's significant for the things that it doesn't charge.
Which are?
Almost all the things that they have factually as occurring, misstatements and things of the nature of untruths, not charged.
Let me ask something. Does a lot of the indictments have to do with the Russia investigation, or is it stuff that doesn't have to do with any of that? Or a combination?
Almost tangential. I'll say almost tangential because this really only involves WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
And Julian Assange.
And he completely denies any communication.
There's really only 2 witnesses against him. Jerome Corsi and Credico, the disc jockey. I don't think he's a disc jockey, radio commentator.
Okay.
And that's it. There's a big, big risk if you're on either side, civil or criminal, that if your witnesses fold, your case might fold along with it. So the credibility of Corsi and the credibility of Credico are essential to getting a conviction.
Mm.
And I'm going to talk about Corsi's credibility when I get to it. But the fact of the matter is the obstruction was not giving him documents that they had asked for. Okay? That was number one.
The FBI.
The FBI. They asked him to produce certain things. He didn't produce them.
Okay.
They asked him if there were any such documents, and he said there were no documents, emails and the rest. Everything was telephonic. That was untrue. There are tons of emails. I wouldn't say tons. That's an exaggeration. There's at least a dozen emails that are attached. So one of the things, and I'm talking about that in a minute, is defenses. What defenses do Roger have? If you were the defense lawyer, what would you do? It's pretty clear what it says. On such and such a day, you lied. You told us A, and it turned out to be B. And the last one, intimidation, was telling a witness to lie. And he denies telling the witness to lie.
Who was that? Do you know? Does it say?
Yeah, that was Credico.
Okay.
He said he was going to do something to his dog. You know, he threatened his dog.
God.
That's exactly what the dog's name was, Bianca, which, by the way, was Mick Jagger's wife.
I know.
I met her. She was a very nice lady.
Yes.
Very soft-spoken, very nice lady.
You had some dealings with Mick Jagger.
I did, many, many years ago.
Right.
So the end result really is he's got these 7 charges against him, and the prosecution must prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. They could always amend the indictment. Possible that they'll do that. But next step is trial. Well, an arraignment is tomorrow.
Oh, it's tomorrow? Is it going to happen tomorrow?
Arraignment is very, very simple. In fact, in misdemeanors, this is not a misdemeanor, but in misdemeanor cases, oftentimes the defendant doesn't even show up in court. The lawyer appears what they call 977. It always sounds so impressive when you stand up in front of the judge and say, I'm appearing 977, like it's some magic, whatever it is. It just means you're going to be there instead of the client.
Right.
And what happens is they read the rights, which usually are waived. They read the statement of the complaint, which is waived. It takes about 5 seconds. And then they enter a plea of not guilty. They enter a plea of not guilty almost every time.
Right.
I mean, there are some exceptions where they can say guilty by virtue of, or there are certain very rare exceptions where you can figure out some additional kind of plea. But that's the way it works. And the next thing, usually, is they set a pretrial conference for the lawyers to get together with the judge to find out whether or not a deal can be made.
Well, they're saying, let me say something, Judge, that just came out in the news that they say the Russian investigation is wrapping up. I don't understand why they would indict Roger Stone and then the Russian investigation is wrapping up. Why would they indict him now? And then when the investigation supposedly, according to the U.S. Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker, why would they indict him so quickly? Or why would they wait so long, I should say?
First of all, there's a lot of psychology that goes along with being a prosecutor. A lot of psychology. The goal is to get a plea.
He's not going to plea.
He's not going to. Probably not.
Of course not.
Roger's a very resolute kind of guy. In my conversations with him, he always is very strong about his positions and doesn't seem to think about fading or changing his mind about anything.
That dude ain't wavering.
Well, you asked the question for what it has to do with Russia. This whole investigation has to do with whether or not there was collusion.
Right.
That's another term everybody throws around, right? Collusion. Most people don't know what that means. It doesn't sound very good. It's not very good. Collusion is another word for conspiracy. Conspiracy to commit an illegal act. So they're trying to show that ultimately what they want to show is that Trump was involved in this, although I've seen nothing so far, although we haven't seen much as the public anyway. I've seen nothing that ties Trump to anything. And so he can argue that it's witch hunt and whatever. And it may very well be his view that all they really want to do is get him. And that has some merit to it. People do not want him to be the president, and they'll do whatever it takes to get rid of him.
That's true. And
so, this is politically motivated. Maybe, according to Roger, it is. And so you ask the question about why now? Because when you come to the psychological elements of prosecution, what you really want is somebody to make a deal. Turn over on somebody else, flip, if you will.
He's not going to, though.
No, but that's what they figure. They charge the guy. He's in his was Roger 71?
I don't know, something like that.
Whatever it is. They're figuring he'd rather not spend the rest of his life in jail, so he'll flip to make a deal and they'll get what they want. But they need to have that leverage, and that leverage is the criminal indictment. So we'll talk more about that right after the break.
NBC Talk Radio, 1050 AM, KCAA.
Did you ever meet a lawyer that was for the people? Someone who had the best interests of the people at heart? Herb Dodell has been a lawyer for more than 50 years and has been a Superior Court judge for 9 years, having presided over more than 9,000 cases. In this show, he will reveal the secrets of how things really work in the legal system, so you can maximize your position and benefit most when you're in trouble and need someone on your side to simplify the process for you. For more information, email the judge at askjudgeherb@gmail.com. That's askjudgeherb@gmail.com.
you asked why it's coming now when it's so close to the end, everything is structured. When you're a prosecutor, you take your little elements and you build on what you have before, like a big pyramid. And so some things come at the beginning, some things come in the middle, some things you need to have established before you can get to the next level. We call it a foundation. That's the term that we use. It's a foundation. And so he was the end. He was the tail on the dog. They were hoping to get more than they got. I really wasn't impressed with that indictment personally. I don't hold myself out as a really creative writer in terms of framing these kinds of things, but the fact of the matter is, it's basically you lied to us. But there are two very, very, very substantial elements that go into proving a case. One is that the statements had to have been material. That word material is significant. It's significant not only in a criminal context, but it's significant in the definition of fraud. In other words, if you say, oh, the light was green, but it really didn't make any difference what color it was, it's immaterial. You heard that expression at all. It's irrelevant, immaterial.
Yeah.
Immaterial. So what was these 7 events? How material were they? They were based on speculation. They were based on the speculation that the Russians stole all of this all these emails, provided it to Julian Assange at WikiLeaks, and Assange was selling it or giving it away or doing whatever he was doing with third parties who were interested in the information that he was accumulating.
And Roger Stone was a third party.
Roger Stone, supposedly, and the language is very, very vague, was asked by members of the campaign, not identified, by the way, to inquire of Assange what he had.
Right.
What's illegal about that?
That's what I'm saying. I don't get it.
I can't find anything illegal about that because that's what they all do. The politicians, what they do. They're digging in for dirt on the other guy. They want to know exactly what and who. What do you think that dossier was about? Same kind of thing.
They do. They all do this.
They all do it. So to me, I don't think that the fact that they were trying to find out what the guy had and buy it even was illegal. And if you lose that as the premise, much of the rest of it becomes immaterial. Whether he said he got an email or he didn't get it, what difference does it make? So his defense, if I was representing him, which I'm not, which I would not want to.
I was going to say, you should give him a call.
No. I have found that all my conversations with Roger, I walk away with saying to myself, the guy really is a smart guy. Smart in the sense that he's savvy. I don't know smart about intellectually smart, but he's got the finger on the pulse. He reads real well. And when you try a case, one of the most important considerations as a trial lawyer, you got to make your client likable. Likable or believable, or both. Roger's likable.
Yes, he is.
And he's somewhat believable. I don't buy most of the theories. Yes. His argument that Lyndon Johnson killed Jack Kennedy, those kinds of things, are a little too far off for me.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, he's likable and believable, and they got a burden of proof. Now let's get to the remaining few minutes we have. I want to talk about Corsi. Oh, the second element, by the way, beside materiality, is intent. Intent. That's really very important. And in this kind of case, you have to show that the person knew they were lying. So if you didn't know, or if you were mistaken, even if you were negligent, it does not reach the level of the necessary mens rea, it's what it's called, MENSREA, 2 words.
And that's what he's saying, actually.
But the best part of it is when they interviewed Corsi on the radio, I was listening to it, I was driving home, and I'm listening to this interview, and he says, "My mind is like mush." I said, "That's good for that. That gives you great credibility." "Well, I'm 72 years old or whatever it is, and I don't remember things very well anymore." And this is the guy that the prosecution is relying on. He's admitting he doesn't remember. Well, he was saying that because he didn't want to be stuck with the position that he had previously taken. So if you don't remember, legitimately don't remember, that's a potential defense. So for Roger, he's got an argument of materiality. He's got an argument of lack of intent, maybe negligent. Maybe he puffed something up. He said, "I knew the guy," and he really didn't know the guy. But so what?
I know he smokes a little weed.
He says that he had met Assange once before, and then later on he said no, he never met him. Inconsistent, clearly inconsistent.
Right.
What difference does it make?
Nothing, I don't think.
Maybe I remember I did, or maybe I didn't. Maybe he was trying to get the public to think how important he was that he met this guy. Who the hell knows? But what difference does it make in the end of the day? Did the Russians collude with the Trump interests? Did they or didn't they? So far, I haven't seen it.
I think what they're trying to do, really, the Mueller investigation, is try to get Roger Stone to admit that Donald Trump knew about it.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's all they're doing.
That's absolutely right. They want him to say that Trump told him to go to WikiLeaks,
or one of the kids,
or Trump told the campaign staff.
Yeah,
one of those, because it's pretty vague. It refers to campaign staff. I mean, who's campaign staff? Could be anybody.
But maybe it was Jared Kushner or Trump Jr.
You probably will never find out. I'll tell you that.
That's what they want him to do.
They're not going anywhere with that.
They're not getting anything.
But so Corsi, if he turns out that he's mush and he doesn't remember anything, how good is his credibility when he gets against the guy who does remember everything?
Right. Why would he say that why would he say that on the radio?
He said it twice. I heard him interviewed twice. Damn. Once on MSNBC, maybe an hour and a half ago. I was driving in, and he was being interviewed. I said, I got to stop, pull over, and get a bagel or something, and listen to this. I'll get here on time. But the guy was saying, well, I don't remember, when time goes by. I said, that's exactly the point. And what do you think if you're a juror? And one of the things I did as a trial lawyer was always try to put myself in the place of the juror. What's the jury thinking while this is going down right in front of them, right?
Yeah.
You hear from a guy that says, my mind is mush and I haven't remembered and I can't remember and it's a long time ago and I wrote it down and maybe I didn't write it down. I don't know. I left it in the bathroom. Whatever it is he's going to say, how credible has he become?
Zero.
He's one of the two people that they need.
Yeah.
The other guy, I don't know anything about the other guy, Credico. And because he said A did it and it was B, what difference does it make? Whether he was using Corsi as an intermediary or he was using the other guy, Credico, what difference does it make? So the end result really is, to me, as an impartial, and I've made no decisions on anything because I haven't seen everything. I would never make a decision on any case unless I had all that was admissible, legally admissible in front of me. You just can't take 70% and ignore the other 30%. Right now, we don't know anything.
Right.
We know only what we read about in the papers and the various people pleading guilty, and most criminals will plead guilty. That's why very few of the cases go to trial. Why do they plead guilty? They'd rather do 2 years than 20 years.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what they do with people who get to that age. They say, 75, you're done.
Right.
You can't do 20 years hard time.
Yeah, well, they're going to listen, man. I mean,
but I just want to end up with a story about why is all of this happening?
Yes, why?
From a spiritual standpoint, we know that everything is based on cause and effect. So if you do terrible things all your life, you end up like Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and all these people. They're paying for it. They got away with it for whatever years they got away with it. Whatever that was, years. They're paying for it either in health or in relationships or their lives or whatever. So the secret of it all, for everybody, if you get nothing out of any of these shows, is do the right thing. Make sure you don't accept instant gratification and pay a heavy-duty price at the end of the day. It's far worse than the 5 minutes of pleasure that you got in the middle because you took advantage. It's being proactive by doing the right thing as against being reactive, which draws negative energy, and you'll end up in Gary's show called Controlled Chaos.
Preach, brother, preach. My show.
No, I had to say this today because I was thinking about it all morning. Look at all these guys that were the top of the line, top of their games, and they're all going through all of these situations. Why is that?
What, am I in hell here, Judge?
It depends on what your point of view. This can be heaven or hell for you, depending on what choices you make.
It's heaven. It's heaven.
Okay,
there's a few instances of hell, but for most part,
we're going to talk. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this by next week because things may happen.
Let's do it.
If not, we're on to something more different. Look,
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now